This is your home for St. Cloud State hockey, keeping you up to date on the NCHC.
One-timer coming, they score! Ripped in! A bomb from Pervix!
Women's WCHA.
So Dana Rasmussen fires and she scores! Dana Rasmussen for the Huskies alongside
The National Hockey League.
Dwayne Kaprizov in for a chance to win it! He scores! Kirill, the thrill is for real! Welcome to the NHL, a game winner!
And everything from the state of hockey.
St. Cloud Cathedral is now 42.6 seconds away from wrapping up the school's first ever title.
Welcome to the Huskies Warming House Podcast Den. Welcome into episode 165 here on the Huskies Warming House podcast. Nick Max and Noah Grant here, back in the first week of June to get this show rocking and rolling. We are into the Stanley Cup final, and at least one team is into it. Vegas certainly is. Florida, we'll talk about that. That's really the first time they've really had a true hiccup, in 3.5 rounds, I would say. So we'll obviously discuss that. Of course, just a small couple of notes here, a couple of NCHC and WCHA moves in the NCAA side of things, one pertaining to St. Cloud State, of course, on the women's side. So we'll get to that in the main portion of the show. We will talk about the Stanley Cup stuff like we just mentioned, and then the AHL playoffs. The final is set for them to begin on Thursday. So we'll kind of just take a brief look at that. We missed it a little bit last week, I should say. So we'll talk about that. And then we'll finish the main portion of the show with something that actually is kind of fun. According to Bill Prout at CenterIceView.com, the roster is pretty much close to being set, according to the website. So on the men's side, and I got bored and, of course, tried to put together the entire lineup chart to see what happens. So we're going to talk about
you
that.
In free time is just dangerous, sir. Everybody's saying,
isn't it? So, yeah, well, other people are going to have input on the next piece of this. We are going to obviously move into our extra ice session like we normally do most weeks. The men's hockey and now the women's hockey schedule just coming out today on Tuesday, the day of recording. So we're going to talk about both of those. And then we're going to have a fan poll, maybe some potential changes for the future of our show a little bit. And we'd like your input as to kind of how those things might kind of roll out as we move forward. So as always, we start with Center Ice View News and Notes and the Huskies Illustrated Weekly Roundup. Center Ice View News and Notes. Center Ice View provides you with the best coverage of St. Cloud State Huskies hockey, from game notes, recaps, photos, and more. Go to CenterIceView.com.
Center Ice View News and Notes here for this week, Noah, and we're going to cover a little bit about the Gary Bettman Stanley Cup final presser that he does before the start of Game 1. A lot of topics, certainly, that we've been following, and for those who follow the NHL, certainly we're keen on a lot of those topics, a lot of these recent, too. So, first order of business is the league did announce that they will only raise the cap ceiling by $1 million. This was something that really started back just a few months back, probably closer to the start of 2023, the calendar year, I should say, Noah, where the NHL sort of tampered expectations by throwing that out. They seem to be following up on that. There's been a lot of discussion on this because escrow from the players is not paid off, but it's fairly close. So you have some player agents. I wonder which one I'm describing. Maybe one that maybe put a sword through a certain goaltender's chest on social media, essentially claiming the NHL is cheap. For those who don't follow the NHL's economics, the NHL might actually have a case for this to kind of just get through this. But either way, only $1 million is expected to rise, so that doesn't help out the Minnesota Wild, the hometown team, by any stretch of the imagination. They are entering their big cap restrictions the next couple of seasons. Next topic, of course, Arizona. We covered this quite extensively over the past couple of weeks. Can you believe this? No, it's been 3 weeks already since the city of Tempe voted down the proposal to build the new entertainment district in that city. Again, the Coyotes were to be essentially the big focal point of that. And now NHL, including Vice President Bill Dady, basically saying, hey, we intend to make Arizona work. They are trying to keep it within the Phoenix area. Again, this should be no surprise to NHL fans, especially in that corner of the U.S.
Might surprise Phoenix a little bit.
Might be, right? But, I mean, just the other day, Gary Bettman on the pregame show with TNT essentially said Phoenix is out, right? A lot of speculation going to where the Phoenix Suns play. Again, big renovation. The sightlines for hockey really isn't ideal. Not really looking good. I know there's the city of Mesa. There's some other land that's essentially been looked at. But I think the most important note here is the new NHLPA. I forget his first name. Is it Marty Walsh? Yep, that sounds right. Either way, basically said that the NHL has to have a concrete plan in the works before the start of this regular season. Noah, I mentioned that this probably has 100 days since the vote was turned down to really do something to try to keep those hopes of staying in Phoenix / Arizona alive. And now with essentially the Players Association really turning up the heat on that, seems to be like, yeah, time's ticking, right?
Yeah.
Really the first time, Noah, and I want to get your quick thoughts on this. It really is the first time that we've seen both from Gary Bettman and the league as a whole really, shall we say, put a time clock on the Coyotes and their potential stay, or shall we say exit from the state of Arizona.
Well, it's a 2-minute warning, right? I mean, it's the final push, full kitchen sink for, both Arizona in Arizona and the NHL as well.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is the final desperation push. Otherwise, they're not staying there. I mean, we talked about this extensively in previous shows. I mean, this, is kind of the backlash, the second wave, so to speak, from that initial Tempe vote. And this is it. I mean, you're hanging off a cliff with one hand on the cliff and two fingers already gone from the edge, right? I mean, this is it. So, yeah, I mean, no surprise that the NHL is trying to push for this, because if not, they need the rest of this summer and next season, which of course Arizona will still be at Arizona State playing there. They need that time.
Barring them just picking up and leaving, which you can't rule out technically just yet.
Yeah, I think the NHL would like to, if that is the case, I think they'd like about a year to be able to kind of coordinate that a little bit. I think that's kind of what they like to use that time for. But nonetheless, there's been interested parties already. We talked about Hartford, obviously. Ryan Smith, majority owner for the Utah Jazz, has been in contact about Salt Lake last week. There's a lot of course, Atlanta. There's been a lot of athletic articles about would they work for a third time around. I don't know.
Yes, but not for relocation. Especially with this particular.
I don't know. You say that, but I'm not sold that they don't.
They don't have a building to play in. That's the thing in Atlanta. So you're forgetting that's the same problem Arizona.
Okay, so they're going to Kansas City. We talked about this.
Exactly. So, and Patrick Mahomes might be the primary owner, which actually wouldn't be the bad thing. So you did mention, like I said, Salt Lake. Not just contact; they've had dinner apparently a couple times with the commissioner.
We've had to Caleb's chagrin. We've also had dinner a couple times. So,
true. But it's still. I mean, if you saw the commissioner, if you're Alex Mariuello, right, of the Arizona Coyotes, and you have an owner of a sports team that isn't in the same league, and they're sitting down having dinner, and it's not a secret that this owner wants to expand his sports portfolio and wants to bring the NHL to Salt Lake City. Yeah, I think that probably internally rattles at least a few feathers within the Arizona Coyotes organization. And this sort of story overlaps with what we're seeing north of the border, Noah, and it's the sale of the Ottawa Senators. Part of, again, this presser is he's saying, hey, this might take a couple more weeks. And no doubt we've touched on this before, that the current situation in Arizona, no question, is weighing on the NHL and making sure that they're vetting all of the different ownership groups. They did come out and actually say that nobody has been officially eliminated. But we saw even last week and a couple of weeks before that there were some maybe leaks, that there was maybe some concerns of funding or capital from the group that was led by Nico Sparks. We also heard that the group from Ryan Reynolds was outright, but maybe not. So at the end of it, the NHL is doing their due diligence. I don't mind it because, again, the last thing they need is to have two of these situations at the same time. And no question that the NHL and their PR, right, wants to put the Arizona thing behind. So NHL still looking to essentially not expecting this to be finalist maybe till July, if not mid-July. So maybe after free agency starts. Either way, most likely before the start of the 2023 season. Here's something that we've also covered quite extensively. Like we said, a lot of maybe repeat topics, but how about the 2018 investigation of the Chicago Blackhawks, right? Now here's
Hockey Canada.
Hockey Canada, excuse me.
Yeah.
Chicago Blackhawks also are the next. I'm double reading today.
It's all right. They're two topics that haven't been fun and cover similar veins. So
yeah. So because I already goofed it up, let me just break it down very simple. So the 2018 investigation to Hockey Canada, supposedly early review by this summer. Again, who gets that review has been very vague. It's very similar with the Chicago Blackhawks. It sounds like they will be presented the report to the league. Not sure if the public will ever actually see this report. And if I'm the NHL, I probably wouldn't want that either. But more importantly, the fallout of that, right, was a year and a half ago, Joe Quenneville was behind the bench of the Florida Panthers. And because of essentially the investigation that was made public, at least up to that time, he was essentially removed from his post. And so he has requested a meeting with Gary Bettman. Now, part of that, him losing his job was if he ever wanted to come back in the league, he would have to meet with Gary Bettman personally. Same thing with Stan Bowman. Although we haven't really heard any rumblings of interested parties in Stan Bowman, I wouldn't doubt that there may be a few interested parties in Joel Quenneville. Again, that's pure speculation. That's nothing I've heard. But those are some of the other things that are going on. And shall we say, a lot of those not really great topics for the NHL. If you're looking to fill a Stanley Cup final presser, not a ton of positivity in those. So yeah, not great for the NHL PR. Oh my gosh.
No, definitely not. But I mean, these things have a way of sorting themselves out. They just take time. I mean, it is what it is. Joel Quenneville, obviously, I mean, all things aside, a great coach. So like you mentioned, in terms of the interest, I wouldn't doubt that there aren't some teams that aren't interested in that. But at the same time, you have to be able to handle the fallout as to what that would entail if the league lets him back in. Yeah. Messy. Obviously, a lot of baggage carried, which is the complete opposite of our next story.
Oh yeah, bro. Can you tell that, Mike? Jeez. And well, maybe you could say that the baggage carried is experience, right? Because Greg Cronin, who had been essentially at the helm of the Colorado Eagles, the Avalanche's AHL affiliate, getting the head coach of the Anaheim Ducks. So this is great. No, we always like to see new blood into the NHL. Now, Cronin has been in the NHL as an assistant coach. We mentioned it before. I think better parts of 12 seasons with different organizations, but was really doing a good job with the Eagles in Colorado. I had worked with a firm over this last year that knows Greg Cronin quite extensively, and just his communication, the way that he is able to approach different players, the teaching, the knowledge of the game is there. And it sounds like he's the guy that is looking at the challenge that is the Anaheim Ducks. They're going to have another tough year, more than likely. They still have some pieces that they have to build on, but they do have a good core, right? And he's looking at this going, hey, I'd love to be the guy to see this team ascend the ranks, right? So great opportunity for Greg Cronin, and a really good human being too. That's part of the hire too. So it's awesome.
A lot of people on Twitter that were like stunned by it because he wasn't a recycled NHL coach. They were like, why would you make this type of move? Like, obviously it's a very young roster with a lot of developmental potential, and that's what he excels at. Like like I said, like the World Hockey Report on Twitter, the tagline was just, and I'm like, what do you mean, It's like people who haven't coached in the NHL before, or haven't been head coaches in the NHL, are allowed to coach in the NHL. Like
right.
You're allowed to bring that skill set into the fold. I think we're just so used to the narrative of like, oh, Gerard Gallant joins his 5th NHL team with the Anaheim Ducks, right? For example, as you're going to go through the other two, the other coach that is going to get hired, and then some GMs that are all recycled names. But then, like, for example, the Rangers got permission to speak to John Hines a couple weeks ago, right? Or a couple days ago. And, that's par for the course at this point. A lot of teams go with what they know. And the reality is not that he's a bad coach, and not to say that things might be different if he, left Nashville like he did. John Hines does not have the playoff postseason pedigree in the past couple of seasons, but yet he's an NHL name. So people expect that to be the next avenue.
Yeah. And that's a league problem too, right?
Yeah.
And that goes into other issues that we could spend hours talking about, but great for Craig Cronin again. Is going to wave a magic wand and they're going to be, a much better team next year? Probably not. But again, you're looking for the developmental piece. As you mentioned, that was his role again as the American Hockey League head coach. No stranger to the NHL. He's got over a decade worth of experience in the league. So this is not like brand new for him. So we wish him the best of luck, as again, it's going to be a multi-year, sort of challenge down there in Anaheim. But as we've seen, Anaheim has they've won a cup in 2007. They've been competitive up till maybe 2016, 2017, probably
17.
Before really their core essentially, it just kind of aged out. So they're in a deep rebuild. But again, the opportunity is there to kind of bring him back to relevance, and good for him on that opportunity. You mentioned some old recycled names. This one, I think, if World Hockey Report, as you mentioned, was going to go, this next one should have been the one attached to it. That's Mike Babcock. The reporting is, it's not official, that he will sign as the head coach of the Columbus Blue Jackets. Basically, July 1, because he's still under contract until June 30th with the Toronto Maple Leafs. This one's puzzling, Noah, and it's not puzzling because, again, when you separate the good head coaches, right? Mike Babcock can coach. We know that. But can he, right? Can he coach in today's NHL? The reports from the players at multiple different teams, let's just say that the Google reviews would not be 5 stars. We'll put it to you that way.
Yeah, I don't know though. And the reason I say that is because you got to realize he was coaching like Canadian collegiate athletes. And I don't think you do that without having some sort of like personal and professional reform of the way that you approach things. It's a much different environment in the NHL. For lack of a better term, you can get away with being a little bit abrasive. When it comes to college hockey, sometimes you have to be a little bit more, kind of thoughtful sometimes, I think, about the way that you approach that, just kind of where a lot of those guys are, 19, 20, 21 years old versus, NHL veterans who kind of know how to handle it a little bit more. I don't know. We're going to see how it pans out. I mean, there's no doubt that Columbus needs a reshift. I mean, they definitely need something moving on from Larson, but time's just going to tell. I mean, I think the NHL, like it always does in the next year, is going to give us those storylines that we anticipated that don't actually develop, and things that we didn't expect that suddenly become very hot topic. I really have no read on how this is going to end up, honestly.
No, not a clue. You mentioned, again, recycle coaches. Again, the Rangers getting permission to speak to John Hines. Again, still under contract with the Nashville Predators. Actually, no, he was fired. I apologize. Yeah. But then the big one, right, is the Toronto situation. And again, the vacant GM position. This name was connected pretty early after the departure of Kyle Dubas, and it was official. Brad Treliving, former Calgary GM, now taking over in Toronto. We talked about the Kyle Dubas departure, right, Noah, and how Brendan Shanahan, I was very vocal on how this just smelled like a bunch of BS and how he wanted some bite. That's according to Shanahan, I should say. And here we are, right? He's got his guy. There's no question there's some tough roster decisions on the horizon. And that's saying it lightly. Yeah. But
good luck.
Yeah. I think Shanahan, and this is why I was so animated about it, is it's a lot easier said than done in the situation because you've got so much talent up front. You kind of maybe broke through, you could say, a little bit this past postseason, but again, it's still well short of what the Maple Leafs were building towards. And at the end of the day, I think GMs and fan bases sometimes, right, you let the pressure of winning maybe make you do things that maybe emotionally feel like you need to do, but maybe on paper isn't the right move, right?
Yeah.
But this has been a team that has largely been the same, minus a few ins and outs for the past few seasons. And you kind of wonder too, was Kyle Dubas attached to that core? This is the same thing that Minnesota essentially went through with Chuck Fletcher.
Yeah, I don't know that it is though. And the reason that I say that is because Chuck Fletcher hung on to his core because he was enamored with them, like you just said. Part of the reason that Toronto's hanging on to their core is just cap strap. Who wants to take John Tavares' $10 million contract when he turns 33? Like, and not to say he hasn't been productive, but a great watch on YouTube that just came out, I believe yesterday, actually, from the Hockey Guy on YouTube, talked extensively about how everyone bashes Mitch Marner and talks about how Mitch Marner is overpaid in this. Exactly. It is overpaid, maybe by $1 million, 500,000. Sure. Whatever.
Not by much,
but exactly. Not by much. Out of the big three, out of the core four, he's the most productive, both in the regular season and in the playoffs. Like, he is the most consistent performer. Now, Austin Matthews, of course, approaching his contract here. The question mark is, does he simply want to stay or not? I think if he does, you're going to find a way to re-sign him. The reality is Toronto screwed themselves over right away when they signed John Tavares, because they knew that they were going to get a couple of good years out of him. Not to, like, he was fine this year. I mean, he's a point per game player. I mean, he's still a great centerman, good 200-foot centerman. Like, don't get me wrong.
I would love to have John Tavares. We'll put
Yeah. He's just not worth $10 million at this point. And part of the reason was the idea that we were going to make a couple of cup runs, and then by the time we hit this point, it would pay off because it was worth it. One, they can't shed that salary cap at all because no one wants to take it, and that's the problem, is that
no one has the room for it, even if they did.
Yeah, exactly. It's like they want to get one of those three guys is going to be on the move at some point here, but Toronto would have to be insanely creative to get that cap hit for Tavares out of there. I don't even think Willie Nylander is in the conversation, because does he alleviate $7 million in cap? Sure, but at the same time, yeah, exactly. Out of all those guys, Tavares is the guy that has to go. It's just they can't move that contract. It's the same with Erik Karlsson in San Jose. It's such a hard contract, and like apparently San Jose doesn't even want to retain hardly any salary if Karlsson goes. Like, good luck with that. Like, are you kidding?
Can't blame them, right?
Yeah.
And you also wonder too, with not just the Maple Leafs, but the NHL as a whole, right? How much the pandemic and the flat cap has affected this, right? We know it's affected the Wild, right?
Yeah.
If you think about it from Bill Guerin's perspective, we've mentioned this before, which is, had the salary cap gone up like it was supposed to, these last couple of years still technically would have hurt, but it would have been a lot easier to deal with, because you wouldn't have been, essentially they were expecting more room to grow.
You would have had $5 or $6 million more dollars to play with. Yeah.
If not more, right? If not maybe 8.
Yeah.
9.
And it sounds like the NHL is at this point where they're about a year, maybe 2 at the most, away from getting back to that point where they can finally get over the escrow and finally kind of open things up. Coincidentally, right when the Wild get rid of their dead cap hits. So can't complain.
It's about freaking time. But yeah, I mean, it's tough, right? Because, you do kind of wonder, like, and I think I mentioned it too, but signing John Tavares was tough because, again, you had a second line center in Kadri. Yes, I'm not comparing apples to oranges per se. We know that they're different players. Again, Tavares, a Toronto area native. It was a great storyline.
Took less money, actually, to come to Toronto.
Less money to go to Toronto, but because of the term, right? If we were talking same cap hit, but maybe that contract's 3-4 years instead of 7, I think it's a little bit different, right? So, and maybe that's part of the reason why Dubas is out is, again, I don't buy the watching a press conference. To me, your mind's already made up well before that in your private conversations. It's a PR stunt, in my opinion. It's, neither here nor there, but Tree Living has, shall we say, been given a messy platter, and he's got some stuff to clean up, and it's not easier, because if you're trying to shed cap, if you're trying to do things, you're going to be moving potentially a player that is very good, means a lot to your current core, and again, easier said than done.
And great for the Penguins, by the way, picking up Dubas. That he was on their radar from day one, replacing Brian Burke as the president of hockey ops. So the Penguins, I think, are going to be in good hands. Excited to see what Kyle Dubas can do with a roster with a slightly little bit more flexibility in some senses. Similar concept, but a little bit more play, if you know what I mean.
And not really much different from Toronto, if you think about it, because it's an aging core, but there are also namesakes that have been with this organization since 2005. Malkin, Letang, Crosby, where you have to have, if you're Dubas, and mind you, he's not going to, he's going to be essentially de facto GM until they bring one in, right? Until that happens, he's going to be the acting GM. But what do you do? Crosby's going to be 36. Malkin's going to be 37. Letang, we know that of his health issues, right? Holy cow, right? So when
2005, I was 8. So,
and it's like for him, right? He's going to be at some point forced to hit the chopping block, right? Which is we have to make a hard shift in this core. Question is, as the last couple of GMs try to give these guys another run to Stanley Cup. I'm not sure you can really fault them for that, besides the Mikael Granlund trade. But that's all things equal. At some point, he's got to have, I would imagine, a 4 or 5 year plan, which takes these guys near 40. And does it happen all at once, Noah? I almost get the sense that it does, right? Because I think Crosby's up after this year. Malkin technically has 2 more years on his contract. They're not all equal, but you kind of wonder, does he do it incrementally, or with such important namesakes to a franchise and guys, brought him cup after cup, do you just cut the cord at once? Say, we're just gonna, this is the way we're gonna end things. I don't know. I don't even know if it's end things. I think you've got 4 to 5 years for each guy, and you try to put something together in those 4 or 5 years that gives them one last shot. I think that's kind of what it comes down to. Is you have maybe a 4 to 5 year plan, but within the first 1 to 3 years, you're making moves to kind of set them up to try to explore that avenue before they hit that point. Crosby, generational talent, obviously, and still a great point producer, but when he turns 38, 39, the reality is he's gonna sadly dip to maybe about 40 or 50 points a season. Oh no, must be terrible. So that's kind of going to be the plan for Kyle Dubas. I'm curious to see what the Penguins do. It's going to be intriguing, but it's definitely going to be a short-term, mid-term bridge deal plan type thingy, I guess, is maybe kind of has to be, right?
Yeah, the best way to put it. So speaking of short-term bridge deal plan thingies, Patrick Waugh and the Quebec Ramparts shut out the Seattle Thunderbirds 5-0 in the Sunday Memorial Cup final. If you didn't get a chance to go on TSN's Twitter and watch his response to what that meant for his guys to win that, is a fantastic response. And somehow he just looks unbelievable with a gray beard, doesn't he? It's just kind of crazy.
Actually, but
so a team in the Q has actually now won 4 straight Memorial Cups, the first time since the round robin tournament format introduced in 1972. So congratulations, the Q. Obviously, the aforementioned Sidney Crosby coming from there as well too. In addition, Connor Bedard.
Yes.
Yeah. In addition, Connor Bedard, projected number 1 overall pick. So they says he's excited if the Blackhawks decide to take him.
That's hilarious.
Took home 3 awards: the CHL Top Prospect, Top Scorer, and David Branch Player of the Year award on Saturday. He is the first player ever to win all 3 in the same season. Not even Connor McDavid did that. Connor McDavid did win 3 awards, but did not win those 3. So, yeah, he's pretty good at hockey. Let's just put it that way. So is Cole Caulfield, the former Wisconsin Badger, signing with Montreal, 8 years, $62.8 million. That's just under $8 million average annual value. Yeah, no surprise, right? No.
Unless you're Montreal, then you're absolutely panicking. But things happen.
When aren't they panicking in Montreal? Speaking of our former Chuck Fletcher friends, the first move by Danny Briere and co. and Keith Jones, by the way, trading Ivan Provorov to the Blue Jackets in a 3-way deal with the Kings. So the Blue Jackets get the defenseman and Ivan Provorov. The Flyers get goaltender Cal Peterson, who, of course, is on that 3-year, $15 million deal, did not have a great season, has 2 years left, I believe. might be an interesting tandem with him and Carter Hart. I'm actually kind of curious to see how that works out. Sean Walker had a career low in ice time as a defenseman for LA. He's headed to Philadelphia. Another defensive prospect, a first-round pick from Columbus, a second round next year from Columbus, and a second round that same year from Los Angeles, heading to Philly. So this is like this is anti Chuck Fletcher. This is awesome. Yeah. And the Kings get 30% of Provorov's contract, defenseman Kevin Connaughton, if you remember that name, and another forward prospect. So, for the Kings,
good for Columbus too. Honestly,
yeah, the Blue Jackets. Yeah, all three teams win here. The Blue Jackets get their guy. The Flyers kind of retool and try to rebuild from within a little bit here, and the Kings, it's a salary dump, plain and simple. So, great moves by all three GMs, I think, as far as we're concerned. Second to last topic here, Hillary Knight winning the inaugural IIHF Female Player of the Year award, voted on by the members of the media representing 16 different countries. She won in a landslide, 40.9% of the total votes. The next closest was U.S. teammate Carolyn Harvey at 18.2%. I thought it was crazy. Like Poulin was like 9% or something like that.
That's shocking, actually.
Isn't it? Yeah, kind of crazy. But, I mean, congratulations to her. She had a great statement about that, winning that award. Hey, if a U.S. player wins something, I'm not going to complain. Are you kidding me? Come on.
Especially if somebody in Canada's in the mix. We can't win a medal, but we can win an award, I guess. So
yeah, hey, participation.
As meaningless as it is. Well, not really, but sort of.
You know, every time that I ran track, I would always get like 8th, and I get the brown ribbon trophy, which it was a very fitting color for the way that I ran track. I don't know, participation ribbons, right? I mean, that's
yeah, but I mean,
no, I kid, but yeah. I mean, great award for her. She had a great statement. If you didn't get a chance to go check it out, I definitely would. But yeah, obviously, good to see one of the best players in international history, regardless of country, win an award. Obviously, a very storied career for her, for the United States national team. So no surprise on that end. And then injury-wise here, we've got 3 technically here. As far as the Stanley Cup final is concerned, Radko Gudas still have not heard anything. He was supposed to be reevaluated today. Of course, played through game 1 with injury, left in the first of game number 2. He's unknown status right now. Third line winger Eotu Luotarsainen is day-to-day with a lower body injury since, of course, game 4 of the conference final.
How did you pronounce that?
Luostartainen? Luostartainen?
Luostarinen.
Well, yeah, same thing. Yeah, you're one to give me ribbing about name pronunciations. Anyway, he's been out since the conference final with a lower body injury, questionable to return. He's listed as day-to-day. So I don't know. Florida's already kind of in a weird spot, and they could really use Radko Gudas. I think that's
and how about Arvin Barbashev in that hit too?
Yeah.
I mean, Radko Gudas is a freaking truck, right? That's kind of what he's known for. And I really do think, he helps kind of shut down the middle of the ice for the Panthers. And without his presence there, you could just tell it really had a ripple effect on the Panthers in terms of through the middle of the ice in the defensive zone. Yeah. It wasn't the same. And yeah, showed on the scoreboard too, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, speaking of ripple effects, curious to see the next contract for Patrick Kane. 4 to 6 months recovery timeline for him after hip surgery. Could return anytime between October and December. So have to see how that plays out. He wants to play for the next 5 to 6 years at least. So, yeah. What? I mean, he's not that old. I mean, he's only
but I scoff because every player says that, but this is the age, right, where your body starts to sort of give you some signs. It's like, your mind is telling you 5 or 6. So I'm going to give you maybe 2, kind of thing. And especially with hip surgeries, right? Those in the recovery process of those, we've seen this, especially with goaltenders, right? You just never know how that's going to heal. Good news for Wild fans, because if he is back, you can sign him to a league minimum. So that's good. You can probably do it that way. So maybe it is a good thing. I don't know. So
yeah, or he could play with Connor Bedard, right?
Oh geez, that would be disgusting.
Yeah, certainly would. But we're going to move on, of course, to new additions for the St. Cloud State side of things and other NCAA player moves as we move to the main portion of the show. And welcome into the main portion of the show. Nick, Max, and Noah Grant, episode 165 here on the show. And the first week of June as we get started in the first week of June. Obviously, of course, I start my new job next week, so I'm really excited about that, of course, taking my boards on Friday, so hopefully all goes well there. Excited to get started, obviously, and doing a lot of things there. But starting with St. Cloud player moves and NCAA player moves, I should say. We'll start on the men's side like we normally do. Defenseman Keaton Pearson to the University of North Dakota from Michigan. 11 assists in 39 games played last year as a senior. He was an early April transfer portal addition. So he's headed to North Dakota. And this was actually probably a while ago. We just never mentioned it. Freshman defenseman Lucas Mata officially heading to RPI from Western Michigan, only played in 6 games on the back end last season. On the women's side of things, though, the big news was St. Cloud bringing in defenseman Ella Anik from Bemidji State, 7 points in 35 games as a sophomore last season, ranked second among defensive scoring for the Beavers, and a very, very, very strong shot blocker, someone who is a very good presence in front of the net. I mean, holding opponents to just under 2.6 goals, which is the second best mark ever, and 32.2 shots per game. So, I mean, limiting chances on the defensive side was kind of the forte for Bemidji. They just couldn't get offensive scoring last season, of course. Someone that, 63 total contests over 2 seasons, 10 total points over those years, 77 shots on goal, 87 block shots in that time. A good shot volume producer too, just someone who gets pucks towards the net. No surprise for St. Cloud to add somebody who's good on both sides of the puck on the back end.
And it's Brian Idalski's identity, right? It's shot blocking. It's making it impossible to get to those great areas of the ice in the offensive zone. This is, shall we say, really a DNA defensive get for Brian Idalski. This is exactly the type of player he's looking for. And as you mentioned, you just get pucks through on the other side. You're trying to create chaos, right? You're trying to prevent, people getting into the house on your end. You're trying to get into the kitchen of the others. This is great. And I think it'll be a smooth fit for this Idalski squad that goes into year number 2. Can't wait to see it.
Of course, we're going to talk about the women's schedule coming up in the Extra Ice session, so you won't want to miss that. Of course, men's hockey schedule included in that, the women's schedule just coming out today, and the men's hockey at the tail end of the main portion of the show. We're going to talk about their rosters. It seems to be close to being finalized if all things point in that direction. Rosters that, of course, are awaiting injury news. Florida, of course, down 2-0 against Vegas in the Stanley Cup final. Should it go to the point where it goes to all 7 games, which it would need at least 6, we would be pushing into a week from Saturday. And then game 7 will be Monday the 19th if needed. So, of course, the Panthers have to do some work here at home for games 3 and games 4 on Thursday and Saturday, respectively, this week. Game 1, everything we expected from that series. Florida just on the wrong end of a very unbelievable paddle save by Aiden Hill.
Yes.
Holy crap. And hit about 6 or 7 posts in that hockey game. Probably deserved a better fate than what they got. Actually out shooting Vegas in night number 2, but it was the Vegas Golden Knights. 7-2 was the final in that one. Stark contrast between the 2 games in terms of the overall scoreboard. What'd you see?
I saw a team that really was trying to gain the physical edge in game 2, and when Gudis went down, and Matthew Tkachuk too, and I say this because I actually Canuck, my gosh. Speaking of pronunciation, yep, here we go. There's your free spin. He's such a unique player in terms of his skill set, his brawn too, and essentially, unfortunately, kind of just let the emotions get you. The frustration really started to show, right?
What a hit he had, though, in the second game. The holy moly.
Yikes against Jack Eichel. First of all, clean hit, 100%.
Yep. Eichel even admitted
in himself. But speaking of Eichel, to come back from that and then to assist on the next goal, any sort of momentum, right? Because that's essentially what Tkachuk is trying to do. He's trying to spark his team, right? Because up until that point, it was 4-0?
Yeah.
And let's just say not really much traction anywhere on the ice, especially offensively, trying to create something. And then to see Eichel come back out, which is good. We never want to see, even on a big clean hit like that, someone get hurt. Comes out and essentially squashes all of that momentum. Florida just doesn't have an answer right now. And really it's, Florida has not, especially that top line. I have Tkachuk with Lou Osterreinen not in the lineup. It's been him with Sam Bennett. and it's been who's been on that line too. It's not Verhaeghe.
You always ask me line combinations, and
I know because Verhaeghe's in line number 2, and I can't. Oh, Barkov, that's right. They just haven't really been able to establish their forecheck because that's really what got them through the first 3 rounds. Is that first line really started to, kind of keep the puck down low. They wore teams down, low to high plays, and then with Montour, Ekblad, and some guys who've got some pretty good heat from the back end, that's how they were able to really start to wear teams down. We haven't really seen much, but also got to give Vegas credit to their first couple of games. Quick transition, quick breakouts. They've been great on the rush. A lot of good chances off the rush to be had. So Florida's not really gotten to their game yet. Is really what it has been.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's just how I see it.
Well, I mean, much stronger game from Vegas than I think we anticipated. I think, in the first 3 rounds, they were a team that was comfortable with run and gun, but really wasn't a group that locked down the neutral zone very well. This series, it's been a much different story. Now, you mentioned guys, like Carter Verhaeghe as well, too. Last game, Tkachuk, Barkov, and Sam Bennett combined, if you do the math, 11 shots between the 3 of them. So, I mean, it's not like it's been for lack of chances. Like I said, I mean, you look at the total overall shots. If I could find it, I just had it up and then totally lost it. But I believe it ended up being where Florida ended up out shooting Vegas throughout that hockey game. And the thing is, people have got on Tkachuk, especially for the extra fisticuff he threw at the end of game 1, and talked about how he's suddenly become this detriment to his team. And like I said, not to say that the emotions shouldn't be in check. And obviously, you have to keep those things under wraps. But he's gotten a couple of misconduct penalties, and you look at some of the misconducts that have been called where it's kind of like, why just him? And, the first one, like I said, not saying the one in game 1 wasn't a misconduct, but you kind of know what you're doing. You're down by 2, only a couple of minutes left. You're kind of trying to set the tone for game 2. I think that's just Tkachuk's game. He's always been an agitator, and people, even when he played in Calgary, have always said, oh, when he starts to agitate over the line, clearly he's a detriment to his team. He's a double-edged sword. You take the good with the bad. He's been electric in these playoffs, and I think, he's a leader. There's no doubt about that, on that team. And you kind of look to him sometimes to kind of say, what, the scoreboard's not in our favor. It's not necessarily about clawing back in this game and getting a goal and an assist. Is that the important aspect? Yes. But when you're down 4-0, I think part of it too is kind of just saying hey, we're probably not winning game 2 here, but we're not going to roll over and die. And you need to know that. Good luck when you come back down to Florida, right?
Yeah. And I think that's the part of the argument that's missing, right? When it's, the score's tight, and even, it got to 4-0 really until things started to unravel a bit, because you got to remember too, when Barbashev in his reverse hit on Radko Gudas, there was a little bit of a response. You expect that, right? But things are still relatively controlled on both sides, even up until that point, right? But as you mentioned, you get to the second period, Gudas is not back in the lineup. We've already talked about what his lack of a presence did to this Florida Panthers squad.
Yeah,
that's just it, right? Is that you can look at it as a detriment from a fan perspective if you're just simply looking at the misconducts. And I get it, because the fans are like, no, we get a claw back in this game, right? I'm not sure if Florida and maybe the players knew themselves that they were in a position to claw back in that game, right? I think they were like, okay. And to your point, it's about sometimes sending a message that, okay, we're going to go back home. And the old saying goes, right, which is, it's not really, you're not out of a series until you lose at home.
Yep.
No question. A incredibly important game 3 back in Southeast Florida, but like you said, you're trying to almost stick up for yourself as a team, right? Where it's the scoreboard is certainly one-sided, but we're not just going to hang our heads and just coast through this game. We're going to still make you earn the 60 minutes, right? And we're not going to, you said, roll over and play dead. That's what it is. And again, I get it.
And he's still driving possession. Like I said, it's not like he hasn't created opportunities, and that's kind of how the playoffs go. You look at Matthew Tkachuk, and the knock was that he's not a playoff performer, and even look at a guy, for example, in Dallas, Jason Robertson, great goal scorer, right? Look at, both Seattle and then on the other side in Vegas, how they both were able to shut him down for the most part. Yeah. It's like good players are going to get that tough matchup, and it's up to them to try to find a way around. Matthew Tkachuk has done half of the battle. He's getting the opportunities. He's just not getting the bounces necessary that he was getting in those earlier rounds.
Right. Now,
I mean,
to add to this though, Noah, you wonder if there is a conversation now because you're entering, I mean, without question, right, a must-win game 3. How does Matthew Tkachuk stay disciplined but still play his style of game, right? Because again, if you say give up the first goal in game 3, right, the sort of emotions, you're gonna, again, it's an important game. You wonder what that approach or that response is going to look like.
It has to be a close game.
And at the end, even if it isn't, right? Even if it isn't, I still think that maybe that changes a bit, because at the end of the day, if it's not close, you got to focus on trying to get the puck in the net. Like, I don't know, but I might be wrong in this, but I do think, and maybe this is what Vegas wants, right? Going up 2-0. Yes, Florida's going home. You're sort of forcing the hand of the Panthers and maybe even Matthew Tkachuk to be not maybe playing the full tilt of what he can bring. Because again, with Florida coasting through the first 3 rounds, right, they were able to really be that agitator, be that aggressor, be that physical force, right? Because they played with the lead half the time. Or if it was close enough, they could crawl back and then still maintain that style. Vegas and their offensive output in Bobrovsky, who has looked a little bit more human, to only half of his fault, right? He's not been getting a lot of help in front of him. But you kind of wonder, does that change their approach in certain people's games to game 3? Because now that the if the pressure cooker wasn't already on, it's certainly at high to near explosive pressure going back home to game
Florida's
3.
shown that they can handle close hockey games and tight hockey games. So I think if they keep it close, I think game 2 again was an anomaly. The only other game that we've seen like that was maybe game 1 against Boston, where the spread was kind of awkward like that. The other thing is only 11 forwards and 7 defensemen dressing, which actually helped in the back end with Gudas going down. But I mean, a more normal lineup probably anticipated in some capacity when they head back down to South Florida. So nonetheless, game 3 on Thursday, game 4 on Saturday. Of course, then we would wait until Tuesday for game 5. And then I believe it would be Friday for game 6, and then Monday for game 7 if needed on the 19th of June to finish out this year's Stanley Cup playoffs. The other groups getting ready to do battle in the AHL, the Hershey Bears and the first-year Coachella Valley Firebirds. What an incredible story this has been. Yes. Both of these teams, absolute powerhouses in their respective divisions, the way that they've kind of carved through the playoffs here. And you look at kind of the way that both of these teams have gotten here too. And it's a unique story because of the fact that Coachella Valley has a couple of high-end guys: Cole Lynn, Max McCormick, Cam Hughes, Alexander True, right? Riker Evans, throw him in there on the back end as well too. Jeremy McKenna as well.
You're Jimmy Schultz. Sorry.
Yeah, well, I mean, he's
just.
I would say, well, he's got 7 points, but I mean, it's like, you look at how top heavy they are. They're a team that they like to bring offensive punch. That's kind of their MO. Hershey's a little bit more balanced. Their leading scorer only has 12 points. Let's not forget, 4th on that list, former Minot Minotauro and former Team North Dakota Development Camp line mate of mine, Mason Morelli, out there, of course, too. But, Sam Annis as well, too, for Hershey, by the way, if you remember that name. So, they're kind of a group that has really been a little bit more methodical in the way that they've won their games. I think that Hershey coming into this matchup a little bit more balanced in terms of like offensive, defensive production. They like tight, low scoring games. They like the ability to kind of feel and control. Coachella Valley is okay with a little bit of run and gun. Again, this is probably most akin to Dallas Vegas last round, maybe a little bit, where Hershey is a little bit more like Dallas, where they have the offense and punch, but they like to play a more structured, balanced style of game, versus Coachella Valley is like Vegas, where they're okay getting into a track meet a little bit here. These two teams meet for game 1 on Thursday. The AHL playoffs, I think, are a different beast. The physicality is something else. Should be interesting.
Well, and let's not forget the improbable run that Coachella Valley is on, right? Remind you, they didn't play a home game until December 19th. Remember, their building was still being erected down just outside of Palm Springs, California, till then. So they started off the first quarter of the season completely on the road. They had some quote-unquote home games actually near the Seattle metropolitan area, October, I think early October. And then they had, again, to kind of make up for that, a pretty heavy home schedule towards the end of the season. But let's not forget, too, head coach Dan Bilesma, who kind of also had that sort of freewheeling sort of, coaching adjunct when he coached the Pittsburgh Penguins. But still an experienced head coach. They've got great goaltending and Joey Decord, former Arizona State Sun Devil. It is sort of akin to that, but at the end of it, I don't know. Like it's going to be a.
I keep laughing because I mean, you mentioned goaltending. When have we heard this before, St. Cloud State Huskies fans? 13 games played, 2 shutouts, a 1.85 goals against, 10 wins, 3 losses, and a 929 save percentage for some guy named Hunter Shepard.
Yeah.
At every level, man. I mean, it's.
Well, and was it between the two squads that are in the Calder Cup finals, somewhere of like 8 to 10 former NCHC players that will be taking part in this. So that's kind of cool, right? So
it's cool when you have Dackard, who you mentioned, who has a 2.37 and a 9.24 with a shutout to go along with that, 12-7, and like that's bad compared to Hunter Shepard's numbers. Like,
right now, the one thing I will tell you with Coachella Valley, yes, they're kind of a more an open style offensively, but there's one name on that squad that I know you'll. How about Matt Tennyson? And Matt Tennyson, again, former Shark, he was kind of a journeyman in the NHL, but actually kind of grew up pretty close to Palm Springs. So being that, a guy that's, been up and down in the pros his career, and is getting the opportunity to play for a first-year team that, mind you, they're building absolutely gorgeous. Again, Seattle, who took a big step, their parent club, getting to the second round this year, something the Wild apparently can't do. That's pissed a ton of Wild fans off. But at the end of it, to be able to essentially compete for the American Hockey League Calder Cup, doing it for a team that you're sort of close to home. Who would have thought hockey in Southeast California when he started playing hockey? Pretty nuts, right? So kind of cool, right? Because if anybody hasn't checked out Acrisure Arena down there, probably should. It's very, shall we say, the vibe is very Palm Springs, but gorgeous arena. The fan support has been really good from what we hear, and it's going to be quite the battle with the Hershey Bears, who I think, at least on paper, are the favorite because of, like you said, their balance. But nonetheless, great finals ahead there in the American Hockey League. Again, a lot of former names that we've covered throughout their college years that will be going off either with each other or against each other, depending on which side of the coin they're on.
Yeah, a lot of players, obviously, like you mentioned, NCHC guys, former St. Cloud home product, ended up playing the University of North Dakota, Austin Pagansky in the lineup as well. A lot of guys that just have a chance to make an impact. You mentioned, former players that we've known just around the Minnesota hockey circles as well. Gustav Olofsson as well, too. Of course, a fairly prominent name in that regard, too, on the back end for Coachella Valley as well, too. So, yeah, it's going to be an exciting matchup. Of course, like we mentioned, it starts on Thursday, June 8th, 7 o'clock Pacific Daylight Time. So,
was it Arizona? Would be still daylight time, yeah, because they don't do the, or is that New Mexico? I forget. Yeah. One of them doesn't do daylight savings times anymore.
So in case, obviously, of course, first 2 games in Coachella Valley. So if you're following along, the first 2 games, of course, are going to be at 9 o'clock Central, 10 o'clock Eastern start time for there. And then, of course, games the following Tuesday and Thursday, the 13th and 15th of June, will be in Hershey. Those will be 7 o'clock Eastern Daylight, 6 o'clock Central, 4 o'clock Pacific. So keep up if you can. Game 5 if necessary. Don't forget the format structure is a little bit different. It's 2-3-2 for the AHL. So yeah, so then Saturday, June 17th will be Game 5 if needed, same time on the eastern side of things. And then it would be a Monday, June 19th for Game 6, which would coincide with Game 7 at the NHL level if needed. You would actually probably be able to see the end of the AHL game should Game 7 go for the Stanley Cup final, by the way, because, of course, Pacific time start. And if needed, the AHL playoffs would actually end later than the NHL if both went to 7 games. Wednesday, June 21st, 7 o'clock Pacific time. Coachella Valley hosting Hershey for Game 7 if needed. So we'll be keeping an eye on it like we normally do. It's a lot of, like you mentioned, a lot of great college touches and NCHC touches into those matchups, and two teams that are really good. I think people think of AHL hockey and they think of it as this, sleeper minor league, whatever it is. No, it is a physical, heavy style of hockey. It is kind of a jungle, honestly, and a lot of really great skill. I think that it would be very entertaining if you could, if you're ever in Hershey or in Coachella Valley, you get a chance to take him any of these games. Would definitely highly recommend. Moving into the last topic in the main portion of the show, Nick, I've been waiting all day for this one, and it's pretty exciting, honestly. You think about this St. Cloud State men's roster. We're excited to talk about it. Of course, before we get to that, a couple of tidbits here. One on the international side of things. First of all, congrats to the United States sled hockey team winning the World Championships with a 6-1 victory the other night. Of course, my former high school hockey coach, Dave Hoff, the head coach of that team, another championship medal under his belt for that group. That U.S. sled hockey program has been dominant since they first put things in place back in 2009, 2010, and they've literally been unstoppable. Like Canada can't even touch them. So congratulations to them. Another great victory for them under their belt. And then, of course, our own St. Cloud State, Brett Larson, named the assistant coach for the 2024 United States World Junior Club. No surprise there. Has international experience before. You got a chance to talk to him the last time he had an opportunity like this, Nick. Obviously, would imagine means quite a bit for a guy like him.
It does. And I think any hockey coach, right, would tell you, as Brett said, anytime you get to represent your country on, the world's biggest stage, you take that opportunity, right? And for those who don't know, the head coach, David Carl, Denver's head coach. And so who? Right. The guy who
good thing the last one was only Mike Sullivan, right?
Right. But, what does that show in terms of respect, right? In terms of, you've got a young coach that's already won a national championship, who's certainly at some point going to touch, shall we say, higher levels of hockey with his coaching career. But to have that accolade for someone that you go do battle with, right? And we say it in here a lot, right? But Brett Larson, I would put in that same category too, is at some point, deservedly so, will likely get a crack at the professional gigs. But yeah, good to see that he's getting a chance to once again serve on the international stage. A couple of other assistant coaches again on that roster, but Brett Larson getting a second crack at it, and deservedly so.
January 12th and 13th and March 1st and 2nd on the road and at home against Denver. So if you can find a way to find the lineup card on top of that too while you're having a conversation with him, Brett, not a bad thing either. Right. As far as the roster that would be constructed for St. Cloud on the men's side of here, of course, this information coming from centericeview.com talking about the anticipation that the roster, including the freshmen, is pretty close to being set, so to speak. So I thought, well, I had an hour off before we ended up doing the show today. So like Nick said, my free time is dangerous. So I decided, let's run with it. Let's see what this roster would look like if we put all 27 of these guys on a lineup card and see what we kind of thought here. Of course, this is the last year, and Nick, you mentioned this in previous shows, this is the last year where the seniors in this group are the last COVID-eligible fifth-year players moving into next season. So next year will be the last year of the COVID eligibility rules. The Huskies have 3 players that fit this bill, Nick, on this roster. Why don't we have some fun here? Can you name any of them?
Veeti Miettinen.
Yep. 2 forwards and a goaltender. So goalie's easy.
Okay. Yep. Bassey. And then who else am I missing? A second.
This one's a tough one, I think.
Is it Kupka?
It is Joey Molinar.
That's right.
Joey Molinar. Yeah. Kyler Kupka, of course, 5th-year player. So,
that's right.
Yeah. So no, I know it's so because you're right. They, him and Okabe obviously are qualified for that. Dylan Anhorn, of course, as well too. Right. So those 3 guys, of course. Now, you look at the makeup of this squad, should it be what Center SVU and Bill Prout has put together here, 15 forwards, 9 defensemen, 3 goaltenders. And in fact, you look at the freshmen coming in, especially on the forward side, we'll get to them. It's a very center-heavy freshman group. Shocker, right?
Ooh, I wonder why.
Yeah, no kidding. In fact, well, why don't we start on the back end? Let's save the best for last, shall we? Of course, no surprise, Dominic Bassey probably going to get the first look in net. I would say James Gray is going to push him, and I'm curious to see how Isaac Posh looks, for him coming in this season as a freshman. So, of course, Isaac Posh, one of 3 guys that we anticipated were going to be here for sure. Now, Nick, if you remember correctly, about a month, maybe 2 months ago even, we talked about, we had 3 guys that we said, yep, they're going to be here, no doubt about it. We had 5 players that we thought, maybe they're going to get a look. Probably going to be some mix of those guys. And then we had a bunch of guys that, in fact, 6 players that we said probably not this year. Would you like to know how we did, Nick?
Not great.
Actually, the opposite, I think. So, of course, 3 for 3. Well, here's the math. as of course I love to revert to 3 for 3 on the obvious ones: Isaac Posh, Jack Ryman, Caleb Thiessen. 3 for 5 on the maybes, Nick. And the 4th one was Leo Gruba, which could have gone either way. And the 5th one that is not coming is Gavin Thorson from Andover. Of course, he's only 18, but was an absolute stud this year for Andover. So I mean, just could have given him a look. Werner Miettinen, Barrett Hall, Tyson Gross are the 3 others in that group that we got correct. The only one that we missed that was on our not this year list was Warren Clark from Steinbach. So, and maybe that had a little bit to do with what Leo Gruba had planned to do, potentially. So I'd say we did not too bad. We had one addition on top of that was not on this list that, of course, just committed this past month in May. So couldn't anticipate that. And we were pretty accurate. We said maybe 2 to 3 transfers for this club. They had 2. So I'd say we did okay, all things considered. On the defensive side, we have 9. So for me, I figure we do it this way. For those who don't know, Nick has not seen this lineup chart that I have put together. So you just
what's going to be on the screen here shortly.
Yeah, you get to kind of react to it firsthand here. But for me, my first pairing, Dylan Anhorn, Josh Lidke.
That was a tough one.
Yeah, 5th-year player in the junior. It gets difficult as we get down into the bottom of this deep pairings here, though. Yep. Second pairing here, Nick, I have Jack Peart and Cooper Wiley. I really liked what Cooper Wiley brought to the table last season, and I think this gives the lineup a little bit of balance where, of course, you let Jack Peart flourish a little bit, but I think Cooper Wiley, a great player on both sides of the puck, really kind of earned that 3rd pairing spot as the season went on and was a mainstay there. I think this might be a year where the sophomore defenseman really kind of maybe makes a jump. I mean, is there another name that you feel like would be more applicable, or, my third pairing is Mason Reiners with Carl Falk on the back end. So
that might be the only switch, is you wonder if Falk is more of a stay-at-home defenseman. And the reason why that could be a pairing that at least they play with Jack Peart is, what have we talked about that next step for Jack Peart? We saw that in, shall we say, sparks during their run towards their NCAA appearance when he started to use his feet more, right? Carry the puck, right? You kind of wonder if that's something that they try. That's maybe the only switch that I would have. But I can't say I disagree with your lineup, which I know you love to hear. So there you go.
Carl Falk, of course, 24 points in 31 games played last season for Alaska. So, as I have it listed, Peart and Wiley and Reiners and Falk would be a junior and a sophomore paired together, respectively. The switch that you talked about, 2 juniors as the second pairing, 2 sophomores rounding out that third pairing. Really, that third pairing, an extra defenseman, should you play it? Brett Larson loves an extra defenseman more often than not. Caleb Thiessen, big Division I ready body in terms of his size. Warren Clark as well, too, a big body. Both those guys, 6'4", 6'5". I mean, big guys. And then
somehow, so
yeah, and then the addition here, the recent commit, of course, earlier this May, Tynan Ewart, 10th in league scoring, leading all defensemen coming from the SJ. Actually, his stats highly impressive. Yeah, a great pickup. I would imagine they had their eye on him, and then as the playoffs developed here. So Nick, tell me if this is good. So of course, playing for Battleford, the North Stars in the SJ. On the back end, 56 points in 55 games, 8 goals, 48 assists, and casually 14 points, 2 goals, 12 assists in 13 playoff games as well, too.
It's all right.
Pretty dang good. Like I said, 10th in league score.
Can we go a little bit further? Because isn't offensive defenseman, right? Essentially,
Yeah.
We haven't talked about one name that is still technically available.
Tried to look him up and could not find nothing. But yeah.
Right. But where I'm going with this is, if we haven't heard yet, my gut instinct would tell me he's not coming back.
Yeah.
Trey Ball.
Yeah. No,
because I think we would have heard that by now. I think so.
Yeah, no, definitely agree. And I think that, so of course, like I said, 10th in league scoring for Ewart. The next closest defenseman was Reese Richmond in Flin Flon. He was at 28 points less and one less game played for him compared to Ewart. So here's the thing between Thiessen, Clark, Ewart, and I guess, throw Wiley Reiners and maybe even Carl Falk as the unknown there. And you're trying to round out, your bottom three and your extra defenseman here. The only thing that I think about is, for Ewart especially, you have a great offensive defenseman, but when you're looking for a guy who's a third pairing D-man or a seventh defenseman, does Brett Larson want a guy like that who's maybe a power play specialist, good offensive catalyst that you can throw in? Or do they want the more prototypical, we go back a couple of years, Tyler Anderson-esque guy who's just a good, solid, reliable stay-at-home defenseman? And I think that's what's going to run into is which one of these guys, if you produce enough offensively, you're in the lineup regardless, and I think Carl Falk is included in that, where it's like, is he going to be that stay-in-home guy? And do you put him in the third pairing, or does he make sense with a guy like Jack Peart where he needs a little bit of coverage on the defensive side while he runs offensively? Or do you want the full offensive spread? A guy like Tynan that we talked about that is just going to bring that offensive punch as well too. So Brett Larson has a lot of options here really as to how to play a little bit more offensive or defensively structured depending on what he wants. Historically, in years past, St. Cloud has not shied away from activating their defensemen from the point.
Yep.
I don't disagree that would be the plan again this year. We're going to jump to it in just a second. But I think the lack of center depth or proven center depth, so to speak, on the forward side might make them a little bit tentative, at least to start the season until they kind of know what they have on the forward side here. But on the defensive side, with these guys like Ewart, Clark, Thiessen coming in as freshmen, three great players that bring a lot of good offensive punch, a lot of experience at the USHL level, respectively, or in Steinbach. What do you expect from these guys who are all big bodies?
Brett Larson has, in years past, you need the offensive catalyst. The Jimmy Schultz, the Jack Ashans, Nick Perbix, right? I think for that newest commit, right? I'm not sure you're looking at him maybe this year as being that full-time guy, because one of the things about young offensive defensemen, right, is there's some things that they lack, and that's their own zone, right? And again, it gets harder at this level, right? So you kind of wonder if you get some experience maybe, and at least get him assimilated and see how he reacts, especially in practice, right? This is one thing St. Cloud does very well, is they simulate their practices like they're playing games. It's actually very crazy to watch how they practice. It's actually quite unbelievable. But you have a good mix, right? Like you said, you can deploy a more offensive type scheme on the back end if you feel like that's the advantage. You have now some of those bigger bodies that can be more of those shall we say, big rangy guys who can be more of a physical presence, maybe, or at least longer reach, right? If you feel like it's going to be more of a, shall we say, close, tight game where it's going to be a board battle type situation. But that's what we've seen with Brett Larson and his staff, right? Is he likes to take his defensive core and give you different looks. I think the big thing with this group is going to be, again, you've got some good experience up top of that lineup. You have a little bit, but there's a lot of room for interchanging even in that bottom third, right? So at the end of it, it's going to be kind of fun to watch that battle play out. And if, he ends up kind of sticking with a certain group, or does he at times go to 6D and maybe an extra 4? He doesn't normally do that. He definitely has more gone for the seventh defenseman, as you mentioned. But he's got a lot of good talent with some different skill sets, some different focuses that whether it's this year or even beyond, right? He's got something that he can play now and that he can build for in the future. And that's wonderful on the back end, especially in this conference where you kind of have to be prepared for different teams to give you different looks, especially in your own zone.
Yeah, would totally agree. And you look at the freshman group coming in on the forward side here too. And, I have two forwards right now that are both freshmen that are not only not the extra forward, they are the guys on the outside looking in. Both these guys with great experience at the, at the respective level, guys, both USHL guys, that could easily slot into this lineup very quickly here. So that's definitely not me saying, oh yeah, they're clearly a step below, here. Like all of these guys could easily slot in this lineup. And that's the beauty of this year, especially at the center position. Man, it is there for whoever wants it. There is not one guy that I look at that I go, yep, bolt him into that lineup and he's clearly going to be in the middle, top line center, whatever it's going to be here. This was a tough one here, but I think that's what makes it so exciting is like, there's a lot of unknowns for St. Cloud, especially down the middle, but that also means a lot of opportunity for guys to step up and really kind of make their mark and, get a great opportunity, both for guys that have been a little bit more veteran guys and guys that are just coming into the fold here. It's going to be a very competitive fall as we enter into the lineup here. Here's the cool thing, Nick, to the best of my ability, and I'm sure I'm missing some guys here, but as far as guys that have either played center at their respective areas that they're coming from or guys that have played center for games for St. Cloud, for me, I've actually got, if my math is right, which is questionable at best, I've got 7 guys that can actually play center on this roster here, Nick. Werner Miettinen, Joey Molinar, Barrett Hall, Ryan Roseborough, Mason Sahlquist, Tyson Gross, and Jack Ryman can all play in the middle. And part of the way that I did this is I went back through their respective USHL teams or respective teams they played for and tried to take a look at where they were situated as far as the lineup card and seeing, did they play center, especially down the stretch, guys that were in playoffs, and could confirm that with a lot of them. So doesn't mean they're going to play center at the Division I level. The transition to wing is usually a lot easier. So a lot of guys, I think a good example would be Mason Sahlquist, who primarily played on the wing for most of the season last year, feels a little bit maybe more comfortable in that regard now being a winger as opposed to being a centerman. But anyway, Nick, here's what I got. And I definitely think these centers can be interchangeable, especially the first and third line center that I have listed here. So it's certainly a lot of room for play, by no means set in stone. But I started this top line here, Nick. If you remember last year's group centered by Yami Kronila in the middle of this here, I've kept that group intact. But I feel like with the fact that the productivity wasn't as high for this player as a guy like Barrett Hall, for example, has a little bit more insulation on that top line and maybe a little bit of familiarity here, Nick, at least to give him a shot. I know he's a freshman. I have Vietti Miettinen and Zach Okabe centered by Werner Miettinen, because I think you at least give it a look. Simply because of the fact that if Vietti Miettinen plays the way he did down the stretch in the last month and a half of the season, where he is a defensively responsible winger, engaged hard in on puck battles, and able to play a strong 200-foot game, I think that allows you to put a centerman in there that is able to be quote unquote insulated and be able to grow in that role. Like I said, there's not a centerman in the middle of the ice here. Your most experienced player actually to this point down the middle is Joey Molinar, who I have on the next line. I have him with Kyler Kupka on the left and Adam Ingram on the right. But my thought is, with the ability that Zach Okabe brings to the table, and maybe if you want to play it safe, you switch Vietti Miettinen and Kyler Kupka potentially, and Kupka's with Zach Okabe, for example. But in that top 6 somewhere, you're going to have potentially a young centerman, potentially a freshman centerman that's going to kind of grow through fire a little bit.
I don't buy it.
I mean,
I don't. I'm not saying that it can't happen, because as you mentioned, there's a lot of turnover and there's the center position is wide open, right? But you're forgetting Ports, right?
He's a winger.
Yeah, but
he was an extra forward all season for North Dakota last year.
I get that. But let's take that line that you constructed, Werner, Vietti, and Zach. Not a whole lot of shall I say, board battle worthy entrance in that category. Okabe is a buzzsaw, but he's not the guy that's going to win a board battle. Werner is a freshman. I haven't seen him play. That to me is a lot to ask of a freshman. And Vidi, we know he played better than the stretch, but still, you watch him in the corners against the wall. That's his biggest weakness. I'm just not sold on that particular combination, not just because of you're putting a freshman in a top 6 role, but I'm not sure if I like that construction. What I don't disagree with is you're putting Vidi and Werner together in some way, shape, or form. Now, mind you, Vidi, even a couple of weeks before the NCHC playoffs, he was a 4th-line winger. Remember that too, right? So, and it's not because of his ability to shoot the puck, it's without the puck for him, right? That to me is more probable, more than a top 6, if I'm being honest. And it's not to take away from what Vidi can do, because again, let's go back to the national championship game a couple of years ago. If he shoots a puck a half an inch lower, that goes bar down instead of bar straight back out, that whole attitude of the game is completely different, right? So, but I'm not sure if I'm buying that makeup, and I'm not sure Brett Larson would either.
Well,
the problem is, and this is where I'm going to throw you a bone here. You're probably in a position with how young and unproven that the center depth is. You may have to try that, right?
Yeah.
You may have to.
Like I said, unless you put Mason Salquist or Ryan Rosborough in the top 6 along with Joey Molinar, you have to have a young guy unless there's somebody that's a returner that plays center that we don't know. Part of my thought process is that Vietti Miettinen, nature of his game, he's a goal scorer, right?
Yep.
Finds pucks in the high slot, finds that quiet area. You give him a puck anywhere inside the dots, below the top of the circle, it's probably in the back of the net. Werner, of course, on the other hand, we've seen this in Fargo as well. Testament to a couple of guys, of course, that have played with him, that have skated with in recent weeks too. He's a puck distributor. I mean, that's just what he does. Makes sense. I mean, he's probably the guy that was setting up his brother on the pond going through, and Zach Okabe, hard in, F1 on the wing on the right side, guy that's going to muck some barn, create some turnovers, and the like. So,
still think you need a bigger body there. I do. And I will tell you this, Roseborough, who, mind you, played against the Gophers for 1 game. Really, after that, didn't really crack the lineup again.
That's what I'm saying.
So I'm not as confident with Roseborough, because honestly, he's got the size that they want, right? He's as a centerman, but foot speed, not elite, we'll put it that way. Also, without the puck, and positioning was sometimes a bit lackey there too, in different situations, different areas of the ice. So if anything, your safe bet would be Molinar there, wouldn't you think?
Well, I have him with Kupka and Ingram on the second line. So, I mean, like I said, the difference is you're getting one or the other. And, well, why don't we do this? Let's round out the rest of the forwards here, and we'll kind of talk through it constructively as a whole, because we're missing, of course, the entire bottom half of the lineup here. The forward group is hard, and not in a bad way. Actually, really, like I said, we're not going to have an idea really of where this lineup is. And not to say that we have in years past with Brett. Even you look at last season, there was a lot of changes, a lot of movement, especially in the, in the middle 6, so to speak. But really, this group might not even be solidified at Christmas. There's going to be a lot of guys where their game is going to have to be consistent in order for them to stay in the place that they're supposed to be. Third line here, very young line here for me. Yep. I know your third line is generally your energy line, prototypical shutdown line. I have that more towards my fourth line here. I think Brett Larson can maybe run a little bit of matchup magic here, a little bit, maybe especially even for home games for this. Again, the oldest players in this line, they're sophomores. Grant Deshawn and Jack Rogers flanking Barrett Hall in the middle. I don't know if you got a chance to see Barrett Hall's highlights.
I have.
Oh my goodness. Oh my God.
But
and then
real quick, the caveat of that is that's at a different level, right? And I'm not taking anything away from what
I agree.
Paul is, right? But you do kind of wonder, how well does he assimilate, right? Because if he does quickly, holy cow. Because
can you imagine if that's your third line matchup?
Well, let me throw another corkscrew into this massive puzzle that, it's tough to visualize, right? Imagine Bear Hall does do that. Would you flank him with Adam Ingram? Would you maybe throw one of them to the wing?
Actually, my thought was if Barrett Hall finds some success, you flip him with Werner Miettinen, actually, and put him with Vietti and Zach Okabe. That was my other thought. But the thought is Barrett's young. That's the big thing. Werner, obviously, a little bit more experience at that USH level as well, too. Fourth line, by the way, Mason Sahlquist on the left, Ryan Roseborough in the middle, Nick Ports on the right. Ethan Aucoin as the extra forward, Tyson Gross, Jack Ryman as the odd men out to start. Of course, remember, Gross and Ryman can both play center as well, too. Ethan Aucoin only had 12 games last season. I wouldn't be shocked if he gets a look. Nick Ports, 9 points in 27 last year. Probably about half to 2/3 of those games, he was dressed as the extra forward. And when he wasn't, he was usually on the right side on the wing. So I put him there with Mason Sahlquist and Roseborough, two guys who, along with Joey Molinar, have a lot of familiarity with each other in some capacity there. Of course, Sahlquist can also play in the middle, so you never know. They might move him to the middle and move Barrett or Werner to the wing on one of those units too. This is a tough task. I don't know the answer.
Neither does the Brett Larson, right? But
Brett Larson,
right? Because you have, we can discuss these things all they want, but at the end of the day, the players will decide for themselves, right?
Yes.
At the end of the day, because what we think is in our heads good chemistry to have a little bit of a different skill set in each line, because you're trying to balance, right? Because the one thing about Brett Larson's squads, when it's good, he can roll 4 lines, right? That's his MO. You have to do that, especially in the NCHC. Really last year where they sort of had trouble was they really only were rolling 3 lines in some games, right?
Yeah.
Roseborough, you talk about a huge year for him this year. Again, kind of fell out of favor after the Gopher series, essentially, right? I don't think that he's out of the question of being rotated in as an extra skater either, honestly.
Yeah. Theoretically, theoretically, that line could also be a third line if they're effective enough. 3 juniors with Nick Ports on that as well, too.
Right.
The reality is, if you even want to talk returners, let's say you think Ethan Aucoin is a top 12 guy, right, to start the season. You're going to have, at minimum, I would say, for sure, at minimum, 2 freshmen in the lineup, if not more.
Right. And Aucoin, right, we talked about him coming down from the AJ, right, and how he's got, a wicked wrister. Again, he kind of had a tough, shall we say, introduction to college hockey, but his raw skill set's there. Defensively in some, shall we say, situational puck management, things normal for freshmen, right? That's just part of it's the growing pains. You hope that maybe some of those have been addressed per se. He's learned from those because he could be sort of that black ace, right? A guy who can still shoot the biscuit. I think he had 35 plus goals in his last season in the AJ. I know he potted quite a few. Was he 35 or 36?
What are we talking about? Sorry, I was
Ethan Aucoin. But again, it was the shall we say the aforementioned traditional freshman. Okay, I was this great kid up in essentially Canadian junior hockey. And now I'm coming to the NCAAs and holy cow.
63 points in 60 games in the AJ.
Yeah.
So
he was a point producer. So it shows you that, when we talk about young guys, right, and their accolades, sometimes they don't transition right away. You certainly hope that they transition faster, right? But that's sort of the puzzle that Brett Larson and the coaching staff has got to put together, right? Which is, and I suppose, like you said, the best part about this is a lot of interchangeable parts here, right? You've got center depth to a degree, even though it's mostly young, but you've got centers. The worst thing you can do is, as a center, you just get moved to wing. That's not a bad thing, right? But in the last 2 or 3 years, they just had a lack of just natural good centers, right? Because face-offs, especially bottom 6, were an issue. We talked about how good, again, that fourth line that got us to the national championship, good on the face-off, good at their shutdown role, was really good on the forecheck. They really just embodied that fourth line role. I could really kind of see a resurgence of that with some of the names that we threw out here. Again, if Ryan Roseborough is able to essentially crack essentially a normal lineup spot, that's essentially why he was brought in by Brett Larson. He really saw him being Will Hammer's replacement. I think he's going to have to prove it pretty early on this season if he's going to want to keep that position. But a lot of hope, a lot of skill that's going to be coming in up front. it's more of the question of it's youth, right? And it's
Yeah, it is. And the reality is, you look at Tyson Gross, right? 36 points in 45 games for Cedar Rapids. We talked about Werner, obviously. You talk about Jack Ryman, who, of course, had 11 points in 24 games with Des Moines. I mean, I wouldn't be shocked, honestly, to see Tyson Gross in that top spot instead of Werner. I mean, like, that's not out of the question, too. I definitely think you explore the chemistry with him and his brother. I think you at least have to give it a look. But other than that, like I said, Tyson Gross could easily be in a top 6 role here. Barrett Hall might struggle to start the season as well, too, as high as we are on him. I mean, there's a lot of options here. Yeah, this is going to be exciting. I'm very curious to see what Brett Larson and company constructs here. But yeah, Nick, anything else you wanted to add for this men's hockey roster here? Again, I guess the other thing, we haven't heard anything definitive, and normally we don't. We plan on doing our NCHC previews probably starting next month, about a month from now. Do you think that this is close to or potentially is the roster that we're anticipating?
Yeah, because one name we haven't mentioned, because partly of why we aren't, is Tyson Gross, is Martin Lavins decommitting from St. Cloud. Interesting that you went from essentially almost no center depth to an overabundance in theory, right? And Martin Lavins wasn't really – sorry.
Yeah. Well, Martin Lavins, actually, if you look at the lineup card, was usually the third line center compared to Cedar Rapids. Yeah, the fourth line. Yeah.
And shall we say, I mean, he probably would have solidified some of that bottom 6, but you kind of wonder from Lavin's perspective, and probably knowing Larson and the coaching staff, probably an honest conversation, right?
Yeah.
That there probably wasn't a guarantee there for him, right? And so he decides, was it UConn that he went to?
Well, I think the thing too is 19 points in 41 games. Like I said, for Lavins, Tyson Gross, 36 and 45, and he was playing below him in the lineup at points. Tyson Gross was.
Yeah,
I think that's something to be said too, where, I mean, not that point production is everything. We've talked about this. And of course, Gross, had, of course, a significant, I believe it was, let me just make sure. Yes. Significant injury the year prior. So maybe that plays a factor into things too, but it's hard to deny that point production. If you have a guy who's listed at the end of the season anyway as a bottom 6 centerman, and he is a 0.75 point per game player, how do you not salivate at that a little bit? You know what I mean?
No, I get that, but sometimes, and this is where the conversation with the coaching staff comes into play, right? Which is, it's not that it's anything to do with Barrett Hall, right? But it's more of, we in our heads as the coaching staff, and again, this is still not guaranteed, right? But you think in your heads, okay, this is what my opening roster might look like in terms of, okay, this guy could be, essentially he's a top 6 guy, right? Because that's his skill set. Martin Lavins, the way he's played, bottom 6, but very good at that. And that's the part that is concerning to me, not because I think it's not, like you said, it's not about the point production, but he could be that anchor, right, in a bottom 6 role that could provide you exactly what you're looking for in terms of a third line or a fourth line center.
Will Hammer.
Right. And at the end of the day, you have Roseboro there, you have some other potentials there, and you kind of wonder if the conversation centered around is like, I've got a log jam there. Not sure, you'll have to earn it, or however that conversation went, right? Which, if we know Brett Larson, it was probably more of, you got to earn it, right? Which is the right way to do it. And he probably saw the depth and a couple of other pieces. He said, I don't know if there's room for me. I get it. Hockey players want to play. They want to be in, night out. And in his mind, maybe just was too crowded of a field. Who knows? Well,
the reality is every guy on this roster was the guy, or relatively the guy, at their previous roster. And that's a big challenge when you jump to the next level. There's no doubt with this St. Cloud team, they are a bit of a wild card this season. With this roster, they could finish second. They could finish fifth. There's a lot of confusing. Yeah, I mean, it could be really interesting.
Remember, you picked North Dakota to finish first.
Hey, the Tigers could finally, this could be their year. I'm just saying.
Well, in our defense, right, the Tigers, they got to the NCHC championship game. They definitely had a better.
Don't cheer for them, though.
What's that?
Don't cheer for them, though. Don't put it on social media.
I know, right? So,
with that being said, what has just been released on social media, men's and women's schedules here, as well as a poll that we're going to be putting out ourselves, a little bit about our future of our show. You're not going to want to miss it. We need your fan input here as we move on to the Extra Ice section. And welcome into the Extra Ice session. Nick Max and Noah Grant. Of course, talking schedules here to start for both the men's and women's team. We'll probably deep dive, especially into the men's side here. And again, we, of course, want to do our NCHE previews probably starting sometime in early July when we maybe hear a little bit more news for some of these teams potentially. But the reality is we probably won't spend a ton of time on the schedule because we'll be revisiting it on the men's side. Women's side might be a little bit different. I'll tell you what, though, whoever did these graphics for both the men's and women's things for the university, especially the women's one, yeah, primo, grade A, love it. Well, let's start as we did in the show earlier. Let's start on the women's side here. Why don't we? Starting off here, I'm trying to remember my logos here, Nick. I believe they have an exhibition matchup September 23rd and 24th. And then they've got Mercyhurst the 6th and the 7th. So They start their exhibition matchup at home, and then they travel both to Mercyhurst and then start, I believe, conference play, October 13th and 14th at home against Bemidji State. That'll be an interesting matchup. A lot of BSU commits to St. Cloud through the transfer portal this season. And then in Minnesota, October 17th, just a single day. Then 2023 Icebreaker Tournament, they are playing Northeastern and then Sacred Heart the 20th and 21st of October. So a tournament kind of right in the middle. So essentially 2 weekends of non-conference exhibition, 2 conference weekends. Then you have the Icebreaker Tournament and then back into it again. October 27th, 28th, they play Mankato at home before going on the road to Wisconsin. Home and home against St. Thomas. Starting the month of December on the road at Ohio State. Single game December 5th against Minnesota. So the Minnesota matchups to start essentially 2023 at least are going to be single game sets. So keep an eye on that. And then the Bulldogs come visit December 8th and 9th before the holiday break. About a month off, actually a little more than a month off. January at home against Mankato, home and home against St. Thomas, at home against Ohio State. Into February, they host Wisconsin, home and home against Minnesota, the only weekend, as far as I can tell, where they actually have multiple game sets against the Gophers. And then the Duluth Bulldogs on the road February 16th and 17th, and then on the road at Bemidji the next weekend, the last weekend basically of February, to round out the regular season before they head into playoff action. Nick, you look at this schedule here for this women's program, kind of an interesting one. I mean, there's no doubt about that, the way that the Minnesota games are split and just kind of the start to the season, so to speak here. But seems like a relatively favorable schedule for the matchups. I mean, the only one that I can see here is, besides the stretch in late January, early February, where it's Ohio, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Duluth, and then December, where it's 2 games against Ohio and a single one against Minnesota. The rest of that matchup is favorable, but I guess if you throw the Bulldogs in there, they're, of course, in the mix in that end of December matchup too. This team's going to have to earn it. We talk about it every year, and this roster has a lot of turnover. What do you think of the schedule?
It's sort of a seesaw. Don't you kind of see it the same way? Because like you mentioned, right, and it's almost, okay, so you get, you get a home series, and then your big traveler out to Erie, Pennsylvania, to host, not to host, but to go to Mercyhurst. So then you're back at home, and then, some, shall we say, local flavor before you're back out east again in Connecticut. Kind of a pro schedule, which is sort of like kind of Idalski if you think about it. Because if you think about it, what's next after that is it's Mankato to kind of get you back into the WCHA. Then it's heavy hitting, right? It's Wisconsin, get a little break with St. Thomas, and it's Ohio, Minnesota, Duluth. And then again, that stretch in February, Wisconsin, the Gophers, Duluth, yikes, right? And Ohio State. So you're going to have a month where it's going to be the gauntlet. And I think if you're Idalski, right, especially with the way those rosters have constructed, and we've talked about that in different episodes, that's sort of I mean, you can't avoid it, right? The WCHA is WCHA, but you kind of wonder if this is sort of a test for them a little bit, right? Because at the end of the day, you're going to have to be able to probably take a couple on the chin, for lack of a better term. What's next for this program? And, you talk about the single game sets against the Gophers. Remember that December game? That was where they beat the Gophers for the first time in a very long time. Here, I think the next step for this program is, can you try to take some of these other programs and try to earn a split, right? And that is, maybe you fall in the first game on Friday, but can you pick yourself up and then battle back? Because, again, a lot of these opponents that we are going to see in rapid succession, it was close for a lot of these games, right? The women kept them close.
Yeah.
But it almost seemed like they ran out of gas after game one, and then game two was more in favor of, shall we say, the higher seeded team. But I don't know. Like it's
the schedule makes sense though, doesn't it? Because you talk about that exact issue. We're going to have a lot of roster confusion, both on the men's and women's side, for who's going to be playing where here. You look at the start, by the way, the team they play early on is Union. I couldn't remember the logo, and it looks like Utah's logo as well too. So I was like, there's no way they're playing Utah, are they? But I didn't even know they had a women's team.
Union back. Remember, there was that program's been in recess for 2-3 years now because of the funding. So this is actually the first year they're back. So good for them.
Yeah. Well, they're not playing St. Cloud, I can tell you that much. But you look at the start of this, besides, of course, Minnesota, that single game, and then Wisconsin in November, until you hit December, you don't really have an opponent that has given you a ton of trouble in recent seasons here. I think the first half of this schedule, at least into December, is getting them set up to where they're going to work out some of the kinks in the lineup, kind of feel an identity for what they have, what the structure is going to be, how Brian Idalski wants to play the identity crisis that this team is going to have. Because every team has it every year. What group are you going to get? What is the MO for this? What is the bonding methodology? Then you have essentially 5 games at the start of December where you're going to have 3 really tough opponents: Ohio, Minnesota, Duluth. And then you go back to the drawing board for a month during Christmas break and say, okay, we primed ourselves up for the big dogs here, literally and figuratively. How did we perform? How do we need to tweak? Handle Mankato and St. Thomas. And then at the tail end of January, you face the gauntlet before getting to Bemidji at the end of the season to say, okay, here is our test. If we had to push through the playoffs, how would we look over this stretch of games against tough opponents when we're a little more seasoned, a little more ready, and then that'll get them ready for the playoffs here. I feel like maybe that was the idea. Of course, you don't have 110% control over your schedule, but
got a little, but it's, if that's the way you look at it in that prism, right? That makes sense. And again, with Idalski's system, again, with the transfers and the folks that are still here, maybe more players to that DNA, that really strong defensive structure type team. You're gonna have to play those tight games where you give yourself a chance. That's how they're able to steal a couple of games against those higher ranked opponents last year, especially within the WCHA conference. It makes sense. Question is, again, as we talk about it every season or prior to, does it result in wins, right? And that's really and for me, and I know we'll probably talk about this at a different time, but what's the level of success for Idalski in that squad, right? Only time will tell. Again, a lot of roster turnover, as can happen in a coaching change, a culture shock, into what the Huskies are still essentially in, right? It's going to be interesting, but at the end of it, like you mentioned, they're going to get some time to try to figure things out within the roster. The first, 9 weeks of the season. And then it's like, all right, well, let's see how we do here. Let's put on the boxing gloves and get in the ring and see how we handle ourselves. And that's the WCHA. That's why you play this in this conference, is for those tough tests. And we've talked about ad nauseum, essentially since April, some of the additions some of these programs have had. So it's exciting because, again, I think, especially after this last season, there's renewed optimism for this program, that they have the right guy who's sending the right message, pushing the right buttons at the right time. And certainly you can see how this team is eventually going to evolve and be certainly in a better spot than they have been in previous seasons.
Certainly would agree. On the men's side, of course, 24 conference games for them. Their schedule a little more straightforward. 2 opponents, of course, that they will only see one time next season. That would be North Dakota and Colorado College. They will not visit Ralph Engelstad next season. But they will visit Ed Robeson Arena. So we will not host the Tigers, but we will host North Dakota. We'll not visit North Dakota next season. So let's go through that schedule. Of course, men's hockey, prototypical, where they start besides Bemidji State in late December. The rest of their non-conference schedule is at the start of their season. What's become kind of prototypical here, October 7th and 8th, St. Thomas gets us started here for the season. Home and home, they will be at home and then on the road, respectively, in that weekend against the Tommies. And then on the road for both games against Mankato the next weekend, October 13th and 14th, before a home series against Alaska, the 20th and 21st of October. That is going to be so much fun. In fact, I should look back at some point when the last time Alaska has been here. And then we start conference play, November.
Yeah.
It's been a hot minute, hasn't it? Starting conference play against Miami at home, November 3rd and 4th. On the road in Kalamazoo at Western Michigan, the 10th and 11th. That'll be
get that out of the way early, too.
It'll be an interesting test, yeah. And then on the road early against Duluth. Total schedule flip-flop from what we've been used to for the past couple of years. And then on the road during Thanksgiving weekend in Michigan against the Wolverines. That'll be good hockey.
Say in Michigan?
Sorry, at home. Sorry. Yeah, you are right. At home.
So barring that they don't have a sickness, they should be there.
So they say. And then on the road, Baxter Arena, December 8th and 9th against Omaha. So it looks like the Huskies, they play Thanksgiving weekend, and then they have a bye week the first weekend of December. So the women play, the men are off at that point. And then the Huskies are off until after Christmas break, December 29th on the road and December 31st at home. So there is a day gap in between those two Bemidji State home and home series over the holiday break. And then back in action, they'll have the following weekend off before coming back January 12th and 13th at home against Denver. Like we mentioned earlier, Brett Larson, find that lineup card when you're at the World Juniors. Kay, please. Thanks. And then at home again. So actually, at home for a 4-game homestand on January 19th. Through the 27th, North Dakota and Omaha, respectively. So on the road in Denver to start January, close out that month at home against North Dakota and Omaha. February 2nd and 3rd on the road at CC, and then in Miami the following weekend before coming home against Western Michigan to round out the month of February, and then at home against Denver, and then on the road at Duluth. So it was right. Duluth is the home games, November. So they have a 4-game homestand in November, and then they finish on the road at Duluth. I was like, that makes a lot more sense.
Because they flip the last series between those two, home and away, every year. So it's the right.
Can you tell that we're an hour and 40 minutes into the show? Goodness gracious. But anyway, we're going to dive into this again when we hit the men's NCHC preview. So we'll go over all this again. But I guess before we get to the final little topic of our show where we need our fans' help, Nick, here, the Huskies men's team, as do the women, of course, need the fans' help to be in the building for those home games if they can remember what weekends they're on and not listen to me. On the men's side here, what do we like here about this schedule?
I like the non-conference schedule actually quite a bit. Michigan, a good early test, bringing Alaska in, coming off of shall we say, a postseason they probably thought they should have been a part of. Thank you, Pairwise, and all your fun, as well as shall we say, the old WCHA. Maybe we can put some blame on that too. But at the end of it, again, I love the partnership with St. Thomas. Again, St. Thomas is going to be another step better again this year. They're under the right leadership with Rico Blas, and they've got some really good names in the transfer portal coming into St. Thomas. That actually might be a pretty darn good series to get things started. And I kind of hope that they continue this even in the next couple of years, because we said it right off the bat that with Rico at the helm and, give it a couple of years, this team will be competitive quick. I think they're going to surprise some people in the CCHA, especially with the lack of better, the dismantling of Mankato and the fallout from Mike Hastings, even though I don't think there is terribly bad of a spot as people are claiming, but they're certainly not where they were at the end of last season. That's for sure.
Well, it's a good thing, St. Cloud doesn't play Wisconsin, because then they'd have Mankato 4 times. So
yeah, right. And then, again, open up against Miami, who should be again improved. You're getting into Lawson early, which I think is important because we know how tough it is to play there. Again, Holman with Duluth, and then Michigan. Again, Michigan. We know what they've been the last couple of years. Like, a perennial, essentially contender to be a national championship team. Bemidji State, again, they've kind of been that holiday sort of team that they've faced. I know they're home and home there with the day in between. They're on the schedule, so that is always a good time for the former WCHA rival opponents. But how about this, right? Not having to travel to Ralph Engelstad Arena. When's the last time that's happened? It's been a year for that too.
Which is, I'm sure, not that that's a hostile environment at all. But I'm sure it's equally disappointing for the players though too, right? I mean, that's a marquee trip, I think, for a lot of guys. So I think that, so especially possible,
depending on how the postseason shakes out, you never know.
Oh, you guys don't want to visit America's Wasteland, though. I mean, come on.
I think if it was in March, first round, I think you are taking that trip. But hey, yeah.
No, I certainly agree. And then, of course, as you mentioned, NCHC Gauntlet through the second half, like it normally is. But a lot of things, of course, to figure out with this men's and women's team here. And as far as us for our show here, of course, we're approaching an hour and 45 here, and I guess don't want to give too much away here, but I think the long and skinny of it here as we move forward into our show, and Nick, obviously you and I have had extensive talks about this off the air. There is probably some sort of transition for us coming related to the way that we host the podcast and the way some things work. I don't want to give away too much until we know those things are set in stone, just in case something changes. But those changes are potential and probable, I guess I would put it in that way. But I think
we're like Mythbusters term that's confirmed. It's plausible.
Great show, by the way.
That was a great show.
They're just like us, two co-hosts that pretend to get along but hate each other in real life. No, I'm just kidding. But I think I am.
It's possible.
Confirmed. But the long and skinny of it, and we're going to put a poll out, I would imagine the next couple of days here, probably tomorrow on Wednesday, if not Thursday at the latest here. I'm going to put it in my phone right now so I don't forget it. Essentially, regardless of the way that our hosting changes, I think Nick and I have discussed about changing kind of the way we approach this a little bit. Of course, at our core and at our base, we do St. Cloud hockey, the Huskies Warming House podcast, men's and women's hockey. And of course, the beauty of this and also the challenge of this is with covering the Minnesota Wild, the World Junior Championships, the men's hockey worlds, the Olympics, whatever it may be.
Hockey news in general, right?
Yeah, exactly. It sometimes overextends us a little bit to the point where I feel like sometimes we don't get to pull in enough, especially during season 4, the men's and women's teams, particularly just because we're interdispersed. The Minnesota Wild, of course, take up a lot of our time too during season as well. And who knows, maybe everybody likes that and that's their jam, but maybe not. So as we're moving into the summer, I think we just kind of want to know simply this. Would you like us, number one, first option, to keep the show as is, relatively most days about 90 minutes, the full spread of hockey, kind of similar to how we're doing it, where we kind of follow the Stanley Cup playoffs, whatever it is, kind of how we do it. Or do you want it more 45 to 60 minutes where during season, especially St. Cloud men's hockey and St. Cloud women's hockey, that's what we do. Yep, that's what we do. And in the summer, NCHC and WCHA stuff, like the team previews and stuff like that.
Do we bring back interviews?
Yeah. Right. Well, you can schedule them, not me. Interviews are a lot of work.
I know somebody who is going to listen to this and give me an immediate text after that. So
yeah, I don't mind the interviews. Just scheduling, of course, just takes a while. The other option too, that we have a third option, we could throw it in here, is that it's St. Cloud men's and women's hockey during the season, and we do NHL and all others in the summer, or we take the summer off. I don't know. And then the fourth one that I put was just other. If you feel there's a better option for us, comment it. We'd love to hear if you feel that there's things that are working or not working, but we kind of want to figure out what our
Including the hosts.
Well, that's a given, right?
Yeah, right. Don't include that as an option.
Or maybe I don't know.
Maybe you should.
Would free up my weekends.
You and mine both.
No, it is so much fun, especially in season covering these teams, and it's nice to be able to dive a little bit deeper into the teams as well too, and kind of take a look at that as well. So, if you're feeling like it should be just more St. Cloud men's and women's hockey and kind of have us dive a little bit more extensively, maybe 25 to 35 minutes for each team, depending on who's playing that weekend for St. Cloud. If that's what you want, cool. If you're feeling like we still need that plus some Minnesota Wild stuff and that's it, cool. If you feel like we need to keep it as it is and if it ain't broke, don't fix it, that's all right too. We'd love to know what you guys think, because as we transition, regardless of if we change the way we host or not, I think maybe we just feel like we want to make some changes to the show in general and just maybe see if there's a better avenue that maybe caters a little bit more to what you as the listeners and fans want. Not to say that it's not important for us to talk about Hockey Canada, not to say it's not important for us to talk about the Olympics, but of course, at our core, at our base, we've been doing this for 3.5 years.
I know.
Which is crazy to think about. Where we got started, of course, is St. Cloud. And like you mentioned, those interviews and guys, like Brett Larson, like the players coming on and getting that information as well, too. So we're going to put out a poll, probably going to let it last about a week, I would say. So you should have an opportunity to take a look at it. But we really want to know your input and kind of feel what you guys are feeling as far as the listeners, because we love doing the show. We love providing, especially the Huskies hockey content. Of course, as Nick and I talked about, we can't wait for this hockey season to get rolling already again. I mean, the roster, of course, it's going to be exciting to see who goes where for both of these squads. And if you feel like that's what you want the core of the show to be, that's what the core of the show will be. But if you feel like the other elements are equally as important, or if there's just one of those elements that is important, we want to know about that as well too. So, find us at Warming House Den on Twitter. Find that poll. We really would like to know what your thoughts and inputs are related to that. Is there anything else you wanted to add, Nick, related to?
No, and I think, if there is another, again, I think, let's on Twitter, again, if you feel like there's other suggestions, feel free to send us a DM as well. I think, if there's one thing that, we want your true and honest opinion on this. And if there's something that you think of and you think is a good suggestion, it's not listed in the very small Twitterverse that is 4 options in a poll. Please let us know, because we, again, it's all about the listeners at the end of the day. We do this not because, Noah loves to talk and talk over me, but
it's not.
It's not. I know. Oh, you did. Yeah. Okay.
Oh, well, in that case, I'm good for the summer. If you are,
right. No kidding. Holy cow. But in truth, right, we want the show to be catered to the folks that listen to us, and if it and again, as you mentioned, I think really well, Noah, we think we're due for a bit of, shall we say, a restructure, maybe is the better way we throw it, right?
And we did this about 1.5 years ago, did we not? Where it was like we felt our shows were getting a bit too long, and we kind of tried to reformat, and then slowly, of course, they get longer as the season goes on because there's more elements that we feel are necessary to dip into. And
right, and maybe that's what it is, right? So maybe in short, do we feel like it's Huskies Warmer House? Let's talk about just Huskies, right? If you like the full spectroscope, maybe it's Huskies plus maybe a college hockey little mixture, and we keep it there, right? Do you still like it the way it is, where we touch everything Hockey Pros, World Cup, everything? Yeah.
Or do you just want the Wild in addition, because they're so close to home? Like, right. I don't know.
Please let us know. Again, send us a DM, respond to the Twitter poll, and then we'll adjust as needed. But we definitely feel like a refresh is in order for, 4th season? Number 4.
Holy crap.
Yeah. Holy cow. And some people do these for a lot longer.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. If you want to be our producer too, come join us. We don't have money, but we smile sometimes.
Depends on the day.
Definitely does. Well, of course, recording on June 6th, releasing the show on June 7th. So about a week, maybe June 14th or 15th, our poll will close, and we would love to hear what our listeners and viewers have to say. For Nick Maxon and Noah Grant, we will see you soon in the day.
Dana Rasmussen fires and she scores. Dana Rasmussen for the Huskies alongside
Kaprizov in for a chance to win it. He scores! Kirill the Thrill is for real. Welcome to the NHL. A game winner.
St. Cloud Cathedral is now 42.6 seconds away from wrapping up the school's first ever title.